You've probably seen it lurking in the background, and I thought it was time to stop ignoring it and maybe tell you a little bit about it. It's my wife's car, so I don't get to drive it very much, but not just that. Oh, I thought it would be interesting to compare the relatively modern Ghibli to my 2006 Maserati Gran Sport. So, buckle up and let's look at some Maseratis. Yes, Maserati, a much maligned marque, really. Often described as a poor man's Ferrari, like the Jaguar is a poor man's Aston. And that's not really fair. I mean, let's face it, Maserati have been around a lot longer than Ferrari and were in racing and with racing heritage before dear Enzo was in long trousers. But obviously, we've got to be honest, they went through a horrible patch in probably the 80s onwards, and seem to have recovered now, but we'll get onto that bit in a minute. And some of their 70s supercars, for want of a better word, were quite spectacular. The Merak and the Bora, extraordinary cars, fetching good money now, as is the original Ghibli. But don't be rushing out to buy a bi-turbo, assuming it's going to follow the same train, because I don't think it will. Not a good car. So, the Gran Sport. Yes, lovely car, actually, I have to say. I actually went to Phoenix to buy a Jaguar XKR, I think, and decided I wasn't quite old enough yet to own a Jaguar, and they had a Maserati there, and of course it was a lot more fun to drive. Surprisingly nimble for what is a relatively large 2+2 GT car. Yes, the flappy paddle gearbox is a little clunky, I have to say. And of course the whole clutch situation is a ticking time bomb in terms of servicing costs. So that's why I got rid of mine just before it exploded. And that brings us on to another subject. Yes, in line with the much aligned Maserati, reliability. So I had my Gran Sport for several years, and actually nothing major went wrong with it at all. And I'm a very bad owner, and I never had it serviced. So if you ended up buying it, I'm sorry. But actually, nothing went wrong with it. Well, actually, no, that's not true. The only thing that went wrong with it in all that time was the oil pressure sensor, which was a bit alarming because obviously it pretended there was no oil pressure, but everything seemed fine. So I carried on driving, and everything was fine apart from the sensor itself. And while it wasn't a daily driver, I probably drove it a couple of times a week. Come rain or shine, mostly shine, obviously, in Sedona, but never very far, never more than like 100 miles or 200 mile round trip, all of which cope with very well. And then on the same subject, the Ghibli, quite a different animal. My dear wife uses it pretty regularly, pretty much every day, and has done some very long journeys to LA and back, so that's like 1,000 mile round trip at least. And yeah, we've had a few issues, but actually mainly just bloody warning lights coming on and nothing else. First time that cropped up, it was the exhaust sensor. Yeah, and that was basically pack rats had got in there and chewed the wiring. So we fixed that. A couple of random codes since then, cleared them out, and there's nothing actually wrong with it. Oh, apart from when I put it into manual and like revved the bollocks of it and blew one of the turbos off. I mean, I didn't blow the turbo. I blew the pipe off the thing. So yeah, there was that. But that said, yes, on the reliability front, funnily enough, we've had to replace both front struts. But other than that, no significant issues, honestly. Service bills are low because we take it to a local place that deals with European cars, and they're very reasonable. So, yeah, I mean, parts are expensive. If you want to genuine battery. We had to buy a new battery for it. If you want a genuine Maserati battery for a Ghibli, it's $850. That's a lot of money for a battery. However, the very same battery is available from Napa Auto Parts, as long as you get the right number and everything, for $250, which is still quite a lot for a battery, but it's a lot less than $850, right? Of course, the Gran Sport packed the marvellous 4.2 V8 Ferrari, whereas the Ghibli relies on the more modern V6 3-litre twin turbo. Just briefly, a little bit about the styling of both cars. I think Maserati retain a rather classic kind of styling rather than outlandish supercar stuff. And this means it doesn't really date. It is classy, it's classic, and I like even the modern range. I think the Gran Sport is reminiscent of like a Aston Martin DB7, very similar kind of lines. And the Ghibli too, I think, shares classic kind of subtle lines. And then there's the interior. Is it a nice place to be? Well, I have to say I enjoyed the quirkiness of the Gran Sport. The gauges and stuff are all a little bit abnormal. Center console's a bit wacky. Let's not talk about the ridiculous reverse gear thing. And mine had the carbon fibre kind of package, so it was carbon fibre look material. Carbon fibre steering wheel, which is not a good idea in Arizona if you leave it out in the sun, because you cannot touch it. And a proper 2+2, if you've got very short legs and want to sit in the back. Sadly, with the Ghibli, somewhat of a backward step, and yes, into like 1990s Corvette interiors. Yeah, some not very nice plastics, pretty mundane, average looking interior. Not what you'd expect from a car that retails around the 100 grand mark, and it's no wonder they nosedive. I'll be honest with you, our 2014 model I picked up in 2018, I think, so just 4 years old, and less than a third of the price of the new one. And in that respect, they're remarkably good value. Both models had copious trunk or boot space, enough for at least one dead body. Remarkably sweet sounding V6, especially in sport mode, almost Corvette like even. Anyway, what do the Gran Sport sound like? So, what's the Ghibli like to drive? Well, it's quite refined, I have to say. Not quite as sporty as the Gran Sport, which kind of makes sense, right? It behaves well in traffic. In sport mode, it's considerably more responsive. And despite the fact it's got the twin turbos, there is quite a degree of lag when you initially pull off, which can be a bit scary if you're pulling out quickly in front of something. There's like nothing for a second or so, and then it all kicks in and lights up. In terms of handling, I would say that the Gran Sport slightly has the edge on the Ghibli. Again, the Gran Sport's kind of a GT sports car, whereas the Ghibli is much more of a 2+2 coupe, vaguely grand touring, I guess, but much more of a everyday car, honestly. It's still relatively nimble, High-speed cornering is very good on it. It feels planted. As I said, I had some issues with the front shocks leaking fluid, so they've been renewed, and that obviously transformed it. It was very wallowy with no fluid in the shocks, that's for sure. So the ride is firm but comfortable, whereas in the Gran Sport it was probably a little firmer. Still a comfortable ride, obviously, but just a little bit more sporty, I think, a little bit more focused. With the gearbox, you've got some very pretty beads. You've got a choice of full manual. You've got the sport mode, obviously, and you can knock it into manual at any time just by pushing or pulling on the gear shift, and then it'll revert back into automatic after a few seconds of you not interacting with the gearbox again. Hanging back a bit so he can get a decent run through this roundabout, except there's a couple of cyclists. Bloody cyclists. Again, the power steering on the Ghibli is noticeably lighter than it was on the Gran Sport, but that said, both give good feedback. All your switches and knobs are in easy to access places, with your cruise control on the steering wheel, various options for radio, etc. Quite a nice unit there in the middle with a standard kind of GPS touchscreen for all your climate control and everything else. Your iPlayer, radio, controls, climate, map, sound, and settings. Other than that, I'm not quite sure what to tell you. Both cars have pretty decent boot space, room enough for a small child at least. Talking of which, the rear seats in both cars, yeah, I mean, actually in the Ghibli, not bad, certainly more cramped in the Gran Sport, but you know, both definitely a 2+2, not a 4-seater. So all in all, I'd like to return to the myth that Maseratis are unreliable. Maybe I'm just lucky, but I haven't had any major problems with them yet. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And we're going to be doing some more of these with my buddy David. Comparisons of various cars that we own, including Renault 5 Turbo 2, Lancia Delta Integrale, and of course Stratus, comparing the two, and he'll be joining me for those episodes, so that'll be fun. So do subscribe if you haven't already, and catch those when they come along. And of course, encourage others to watch my lunacy.